Today, Mushoku Tensei, a fantasy isekai produced by a studio few have heard of before, based on a light novel that's been around for years, unadapted. Now brought to life to become a contender for one of the better shows of the year, or rather, it had the potential to be. Anyways, oh Ark, you should have made this video weeks ago! Except no, I shouldn't have. One of the show's major problems, which we'll get to, is something that could only be resolved with time. And while I'm usually one to promote the idea that you should not have to wade through episodes of to get to the good stuff, Mushoku Tensei is this weird beast where the high points of the show exist from episode 1. So it's really just a matter of if those same high points are enough to offset the also existing low points. But we'll get to that. Welcome to First Reaction. Let's jam. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. Glass Reflection would like to thank the sponsor for today's video being, of course, the people over at Surfshark VPN. A VPN is a way for you to protect your privacy and what you view online as you surf and watch things on the web. Not only does it secure your data to stop people like those from your ISP from seeing where you are connecting from, but you can also use it to change your digital location to that of another country to bypass their pesky region locking. Content blocked on services such as Netflix and YouTube can be accessible simply by connecting to a local server from the country that you would like to access. In the case of Mushoku Tensei, if you wanted to watch the series on, say, Funimation, but exist in a country that they don't service due to geolocking, then you should be able to use Surfshark's VPN to bypass that and watch the Sakuga goodness that awaits you. Best of all, Surfshark is available on other devices as well as your PC, so if, like me, you want to avoid the dumpster fire that is Funimation's main website at all costs, watching on mobile or on a PlayStation like I do is totally an option for you. There will be a link and promo code in the description where you can sign up for a percentage off, as well as an extra 3 months free because we like you guys so much. And best of all, if you try it out and you find that it doesn't help, it's not doing what you expected, or it doesn't end up unblocking the content that you want it to, Surfshark also offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, no questions asked. Thank you very much to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. Now, back to Mushoku Tensei. Quite often, when I talk about shows in particular genres, specifically the genres like slice of life, and in this case, isekai, where there have been no shortage of stories covering almost every aspect of it, in these cases, I like to find and point out a show's quirk. The thing that this show has, which others in its genre don't. But Mushoku Tensei brings a problem with that I didn't actually see happening with this genre, honestly. Put in simple terms, it pulled a JoJo. See, Mushoku Tensei's original novel is super popular, but it's also been around for a while. This original novel for the series, not even a light novel yet, came out in late 2012. As such, it popularized several aspects of the genre that we take for granted. Now, of course, I'm not saying that it was an originator for some of these tropes or even the genre as a whole, since, like, several other narratives came out around the same time or before it. The trapped in an MMO style of isekai narrative have been around since the early 2000s, with shows like Log Horizon building on them from around the start of the 2010s. And hell, isekai itself has been around for decades in a variety of forms, but Mushoku Tensei was one of the first super popular isekai from our modern age to focus on reincarnation isekai specifically. Now, what does this have to do with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure? Well, JoJo, as a narrative, has also been around for a super long time, albeit that manga started way back in the 80s, so it's probably not comparable just in sheer amount of time that has passed. But the point that I'm getting at is that by the time that anime production studio David Productions came around to give JoJo a proper anime adaptation, 25 years have passed, during which time a massive handful of narrative tropes that JoJo popularized had been copied and utilized by countless other narratives since, meaning that for some people, watching the JoJo adaptation could have felt like watching something that they'd already seen before. Unless, of course, a decent amount of JoJo's modern audience had only been watching anime for like 5 years or so before it came out, in which case that probably didn't bother them and they're seeing the tropes for the first time along with this adaptation of JoJo. But in the 8 to 9 years since Mushoku Tensei was released in print, many of its defining aspects have been copied, and in many places just straight up done better, or at least done more interestingly than what came before, which puts this adaptation in an awkward position of having to present a narrative that some of us who have been watching the drudge of isekai for almost the last decade, is somewhat stale. That said, Mushoku Tensei does indeed have a particular trait that few other isekai have copied, or rather a trait that they have copied, but usually not to this extreme, and also not without some kind of mitigating element. Its protagonist. If you've heard anything about this series so far, it's probably about Rudy, our newly reincarnated bundle of joy. A former slob-like shut-in of a man, Rudy comes from our world where his days were wasted away gouging on junk food, playing MMOs, and watching underage animated girls with his pants down. Eventually, he finds himself on the wrong end of everyone's favorite truck-shaped plot device, and ends up whisked away to another world to witness his own birth. To say that Rudy is a degenerate is kind of putting it lightly. He never misses an opportunity to be a creep, lustfully ogling his new mother, his maid. He even steals the panties from his tutor, which he starts to call his holy relic. Very rarely does a scene go by where you are not reminded just how terrible of a human being Rudy is and was, despite being reborn into brand new circumstances and with a brand new lease on life. Old habits die hard, as it were, and the little scoundrel spends far too long doing things that really he only gets away with narratively because everyone around him thinks he's too young to know what he's doing. But we, the audience, know better. Rudy is the make it or break it point for people. Is there a reason why he acts the way he does? Yes. Will it eventually tie into the narrative in a positive way? Well, it definitely looks like that may end up being the case. Does the author take advantage of this for unnecessary fan service at every opportunity? Also, yes. The purpose of Rudy's deviant nature, I hope, is to take someone like him who his old society, our society, would consider to be irredeemable and slowly over time make him into a better person, or at least not much of a freaking creep. It basically should be a redemption story. But that transformation takes time. It takes countless events in the narrative to show Rudy both different ways to live and also possible consequences for his previous life. Rudy is not a perfect protagonist. Like, you can look at other reincarnated protags like Rimuru or Mine, who could arguably be considered a little too perfect. Their knowledge is a bit overplayed for the plot, or their magical abilities become so overpowered as to make challenges for them almost anything but. Rudy, though, doesn't have a counterbalance early on to make him more palpable before his character development starts to really kick in. I'd say in many ways that his nature would make him really good friends with our boy Kazuma from Konosuba.
Kazuma desu.
But for Kazuma, however, no matter terrible of a person he is, it's balanced by the fact that everyone he interacts with is terrible in their own way. Konosuba is nothing if not an example of how to make an interesting narrative chock full of terrible people. This, for Kazuma specifically, makes his life somewhat miserable, or at least not ideal, and it works to balance his nature, something Rudy doesn't have. In fact, Rudy has been lucky in his reincarnation to be given support from a loving family, to have a natural aptitude for this world's magic, but these things do not directly help him with his actual problems. That being, to take this new life presented before him and make the best of it. So, of course, this does end up conflicting a bit with one of my beliefs that it gets better later is not an excuse. If you watch the first few episodes of this and are turned off by Rudy's attitude, the over-sexualized focus on secondary characters at times, and just all of the things that could be considered superfluous to the overall plot or the world that is being built around it, I do not blame you. I have avoided countless harem anime of varying popularity because I have limits to what I feel like handling when it comes to fan service and how it does or does not benefit the aspects of the show I'm watching. What aspects am I watching this show for, you ask? Well, that's easy. The massive amount of fantasy world building and, most importantly, that Sakuga, though. Interestingly enough, the production studio behind Mushoku Tensei, Studio Bind, hasn't been the lead studio on any production before. This is their first series. Damn. Coming out of the gate strong, ain't you? That being said, Bind didn't come out of nowhere and is instead a company created out of the mutual understanding between existing studios Egg Firm and White Fox. What this means is that if you've wondered why some of the animation from White Fox's series ReZero have been perhaps a bit lacking compared to the show's initial season, well, maybe this is where a bunch of their talent went. Of course, I could not know what I'm talking about. I am just making guesses, but, you know, that's a thing. And I can't necessarily say that it was misplaced. When I mentioned that this show has the potential to be a contender for Anime of the Year, it is solely based on these production values. In a season chock full of amazing shows, both new and carried over from last year, the level of quality in this series, visually, gives it a massive edge over the competition for the title. There is just so much good here, and not just from the animation, but from the soundtrack and sound design, and the world building especially has been thoroughly engaging. Rudy's father, while probably just as much of a degenerate as he is, has lived a life alongside his wife that, while only hinted at and not shown, gives off this very interesting vibe. They used to be adventurers. They are at the point in their lives that most narratives don't get to. We don't see the leads of adventuring parties go off and start families. That's the type of story that only exists in an epilogue. And both Rudy's tutor as well and his childhood friend have magical abilities, at least on par with him, if not better. And just like the various aspects of how magic works in this world is extremely well presented, and how it's shown to us at the same time that Rudy learns it. It's just so well done. But of course, some of it I'm not the greatest fan of, as the story keeps taking massive leaps through Rudy's childhood of only 7 years, just showing us the interesting moments. And that makes it feel like nothing else happens during the time where the camera isn't there, despite so much time passing. And also, the show wants us to believe that Rudy never saw his healing magic-wielding mother use magic at all for like his first year or so of life because, you know, the camera wasn't there to witness it with him? Sure. I can suspend my disbelief for that, I guess. All in all, Mushoku Tensei has ended up becoming a show that I am following this season, but it is one that I also can't actively recommend. The bad parts that I can identify are usually deal breakers for a lot of people I know. And as I said before, I totally understand not wanting to watch this series on that basis alone. I'm also not watching this series because I expect those aspects to go away or for it to get better later, because even if it does, and I hope it does for my own enjoyment of the series, that's never enough of an excuse to convince people to trudge through the initial episodes if those aspects were something that they don't enjoy watching. So what does that mean as far as should you watch Mushoku Tensei? Well, if you're like me and can somehow just roll your eyes through Rudy's attitude and hope that he gets some kind of comeuppance later on that, or if his attitude improves, then great, absolutely, watch the series. Otherwise, no. There is a decent amount of good here that, for me, outweighs the bad, but only just enough so that I can watch the series and enjoy it enough to keep watching. But it absolutely stops the series from being top tier in my books. And thus, we have reached the end of the video. As usual, there will be links in the description to watch Mushoku Tensei on Funimation, and of course, a very special thank you to my patrons, who I love and deeply appreciate. Specifically, patrons Calhoun Boy, Hector Montemayor, Rune Jacobson, Ryfen Bonaparte, City Yamako, and Wago221 for being especially awesome. You guys are great. And until next time. Wow, is it already March already? Holy crap, 2021 is going by way faster than 2020 ever did. Like, February already feels like it didn't even exist at the rate that it's flying past, and, well, you know what they say about March. It's coming. And until then, ladies, gentlemen, and others, watch more anime, and stay frosty.